Welcome to the Pretty Intense podcast. Today, I get to be told by my guest that my questions are pretty intense, which is funny because the guest today is Rich Roll. I went on Rich Roll's show when I was promoting my book called Pretty Intense back in the beginning of 2018. And I did 3 shows. I did Rich's show, Lewis Howes, and Joe Rogan. And after I did those shows, I didn't even know what podcasts were barely at that point. I was like, I'm going to sit down for how long with somebody? I got to tell them how grateful I was for that experience because it's by doing those podcasts that I fell in love with them. And I was like, that's a really fun format. I love going deep. Like I have energy for that. The 7 or 15 minute interviews are like, you're going to ask me the same thing everyone always asks me, and it's not going to be that interesting in my mind. Okay, Rich Roll he's an ultra endurance athlete, maybe how you've heard of him. He's written many books, including an autobiography about his story, cookbooks, as well as now he has books out called Voicing Change. Volume 2 is out, and they are highlighting through photography, beautiful photography, as well as little synopsis of stories from his guests. He's also a public speaker and, of course, a podcaster. Yeah, what do 2 podcasters talk about? We talked about life. We talked about like how it goes, how he was able to get to where he's at. Transformation was a big topic at the beginning, and he loves to talk to people about it, but I'm like, you're a transformation guy. So we got to hear the stories about what that's like for him so that maybe he can help others understand, that process. And then we just riffed on life. What's going to solve the world's problems. I hope you love the show and you hit subscribe and the bell for notifications. And please leave your comments below about maybe your thoughts as to how we could change the world for the better. Where were we with the podcast before the podcast again, talking about how awesome podcasts were?
Yeah, how enriching your experience has been, how many amazing people you get to meet, how the research nourishes you. It's all good. I think of it as like almost a phenomenal scam to hoodwink amazing people and hijack them and make them spend time with you. And as a result, you get nourished. You get to share that with the audience. And then a lot of these people, as I'm sure you've had this experience, like become your friends or they become, people in your life, which is such a cool thing.
There's just something magical that happens when you like escape out of the old paradigm of the 7-minute interview or 15-minute interview, and you enter this like hour and a half or whatever it ends up being podcast, or there's like a real special connection.
Yeah, well, I think if you're going to talk to somebody for an extended period of time, hopefully you'll get a glimpse of who that real person is. And if you can establish trust and a sense of comfort, I'm talking as a host, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well. When you can kind of establish that emotional connectivity and make them feel safe, then they're more likely to be more vulnerable. And I think people like to talk about themselves too. And if you can be truly interested in that person, you are in a position to, discover a little bit of magic, I think.
Do you have any like techniques? Do you have any certain things that you do that, yeah, so you do. The laugh is a yes.
Not techniques. For me, it's always an intuitive adventure, but I have learned that that I have to be naturally curious in the person that I'm sitting across from. If I'm not feeling it within myself, then the experience is probably going to be flat for the listener or the viewer, even if that person is amazing. Like I'm not the right host to have that conversation with that person. So booking the guests is something that I still do. I can't imagine having anyone else book it because it's my own, curiosity, I think, that drives the whole thing. And I think research is really important. There are certain hosts who can just, show up without any preparation and create something amazing out of that. I'm not one of those people. I have to do a lot of homework, but then I have to let go of that homework and try to just show up and be as present as possible and allow the experience to be what it wants to be rather than holding on tight. I need to make sure that we hit these topics. I try to, it's a dance of okay, there's a certain direction I want to go, but I also, have to sit back and let it be what it wants to be. And I think within that is the importance of listening, instead of being caught up in your head about, oh my God, what's my next question going to be? Or, I just had a brain fart and I can't remember what I wanted to talk about. And just, being present, I think, allows you to kind of flow with, wherever the guest wants to go.
How much of the time would you say your interviews end up following any kind of intended flow or question? Like, what percentage of the things that you think you're going to hit on do you hit on?
Yeah, I think it depends on the type of guest. Like if I'm having a scientist, for example, on, then it's going to be much more outline driven. Like there are certain things I want to make sure to cover to make it as impactful for the audience as possible, as opposed to somebody who just has an amazing story. That's going to be a different type of approach. But on average, I'd say, maybe in the 70 to 80% range of what I want to cover. I think it's important to leave the audience not exhausted, but wanting more. So, rather than like, this is a lecture and we have to cover all of these things, and at the end of that experience, everyone is exhausted, like that's not the experience I'm trying to cultivate. Like I want them, I think there's, there's something about covering most of it. And then if that person is left from the experience, like excited about it, then they're going to go on their own adventure to dig deeper and learn more about that subject matter or that person. And I think also you can run into the problem of preparing too much where you know the answer to every question. So you have to kind of hold back on the prep too. So you have the opportunity of being surprised, like, oh my God, I didn't know that. Tell me more about that. Because if you already know, then your reaction is going to be flatter than it would be if it was a more organic experience. So it is that tension between, being prepared, but also being not so schooled up that you can kind of be surprised and put yourself in the position of the audience.
What do you think makes a good guest? I think this is kind of an interesting question because, sometimes there's unexpectedly really good guests. So what for you makes that really good guest?
Most important is that the guest wants to be there. They're not there because a publicist told them they needed to do it. Like they're genuinely excited. Like, oh my God, I get to sit down and talk to Danica. Like, how cool is that? So they're ready and good to go. I think that's important. I think, people who have a grasp of how to tell a good story is important. Yeah. Not everybody knows how to do that. It's a skill and a talent in its own right. Or somebody who really has command over their field of expertise and not only, is an expert in their field, but has the communication skills to convey that information in a way that isn't too complicated for the audience, but also isn't speaking down to the audience. I think that's another, very specific skill set that not everybody has. And listen, when you do many, many of these, like I've done over 700 at this point, like not everyone is going to crush it. So then the responsibility rests on your shoulders as the host to, create the best experience with a guest who's not media trained or doesn't understand, the nuances of how to communicate effectively on a podcast, and to, bring out the best of that person.
Where do you think vulnerability fits in with that? And maybe actually define vulnerability.
I mean, vulnerability is the courage to express something that is intimate to you, that isn't necessarily public knowledge, that reveals a more shrouded truth about that person. It doesn't have to be an embarrassing story. It just has to be something that is emotionally real. And I think vulnerability is hugely important. I've learned to be vulnerable, and it's kind of a scary thing to talk about stuff that maybe you'd rather not be part of the public discourse. But I think in sharing, my own vulnerability publicly, it gives other people the courage to think more deeply about their own experiences. And I think it creates a connection with the guest and also with the audience. Like if I'm in a podcast conversation where somebody's sharing a story and I want to go a little bit deeper, I can't expect them to have the courage to take that extra step and go someplace maybe they've never gone before if I'm not willing to do it myself. So I always try to lead with vulnerability, which then creates a safer place where the trust level increases. And it's not appropriate for all conversations. You know, like, again, like if I have a medical doctor and I'm trying to learn about something very specific, maybe vulnerability isn't, you know, really part of that equation. But, you know, if somebody has endured an extraordinary hardship and, you know, had struggle in their life and come out the other side, you know, that's a story where vulnerability is super important. And again, it goes back to, you know, trust and safety, like always trying to create like a really comfortable space where, you know, the microphones and the cameras kind of vanish into the background and it's just, you know, two people who are locked in on each other. And for that reason, like, trying to cultivate that emotional connection is super important. So leading with vulnerability is one way that I do that. But, you know, really listening to somebody, like somebody knows when they're being seen and when they're being listened to. And if I can figure out a way to, you know enough about that person where it's like, oh, let's talk about this thing because we can really connect over that. And then we're like locked in with each other. Then I think we're in a better position for that person to maybe reveal something about themselves that they haven't before or that is, you know, sensitive. So, you know, I think that's another kind of like little dance. And I'm not sharing that as a way to manipulate the person, but really to,
it doesn't seem like
you know,
that.
get the best out of what they have to say. Yeah.
Yeah. This is like kind of a new phase in society with having so much information now available in this sort of expansive platform arena of podcasts. And I mean, there's been somewhat long format in the past, of course, but they're going to be like, you know, not much more few and far between. So what do you think the ripple effect of this new delivery of information and vulnerability and sharing and stories and personality, what do you think that ripple effect is in society?
I think it's a net positive. You know, I think we're very much in the adolescent phase of the internet and trying to get our footing with how to manage such a powerful distribution system that connects us in such a profound way. But also, you know, we've seen how it can be, you know, weaponized or used for not so positive purposes. And I think younger generations are much savvier than older people about trying to separate truth or reality from fiction or manipulation. But on the net, I would say that the podcasting world has had an incredible effect on raising awareness and providing people with not just tools and information, but stories to help guide how we think about what it means to be human, you know, what it is that we value, where we want to invest our time and our focus. Like, not a day goes by that I don't reflect on what it would have been like when I was a young person trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I could just dial up a podcast of somebody who is excelling in a particular field and listen to them tell the story about how they, you know, got to that place. Like, I just think it's an incredible resource for anybody. We're all trying to level up on some level. We're all trying to grow. We're all, you know, maybe less than satisfied with where we're at in life and trying to figure out how to get to that place where we can be more fulfilled or more purpose-driven or happier in our career choices or our relationships. And there's just, you know, almost an infinite amount of content out there for free that is you know, on tap with just a few clicks that can really help a lot of people. And I can't think of anything more gratifying for me personally to spend my time doing than to contribute to that.
Well, you talked about, you know, sharing and it makes me think about how much restriction and shadow banning people. And, if this is an opportunity to have an opinion or say something, it's not possible that whatever I say or whatever you say every single time, everybody will agree with, or even at any point in time. There'll always be disagreements. But were you affected in the last couple of years with just how overwhelming the control of messaging has been?
Was I affected? I mean, I was affected just like everybody else, trying to figure out, what's true and what's not, and who are the authorities that I should be listening to, and who are the authorities that shouldn't be trusted, and what is the relationship between mainstream media and alternative media. It was very disorienting. I'm somebody who's pretty online, especially for somebody who's my age, and it was confusing for the most conscientious person trying to make good choices about their information diet. Was I affected personally in terms of the podcast? Like, I don't know. I don't think so. I'm not somebody who's out courting controversy in that regard. But I am trying to have important, meaningful conversations about things that affect everybody. And, I think the one of the challenges that I spend a lot of time thinking about is the relationship between the quality of content that we choose to put out there versus what the algorithm favors, or becoming a prisoner of audience capture. Like, I know that if I were to host person X, Y, or Z, that I could create, a title and a thumbnail for that episode that would attract a lot of attention and probably increase subscriber growth and create a mini media cycle for being controversial. But I'm not really interested in doing that. Like, I'm trying to create timeless conversations that exist kind of outside what's popular today. And I think that takes a little bit of maturity, and also, may have sacrificed the growth and the reach of what I'm doing, but I can sleep at night knowing that, I am sort of adhering to my personal values.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. And I agree. I love that. I think that just knowing who you are is the most, I think, an important part to the podcast. Actually, that's an interesting question. How has it evolved? Because, I feel like even for myself, like the beginning versus now, I'm like, wow, okay, there's like a form to it. There's like a certain sort of pattern of questions I ask a lot of people. There's a pattern of how I interview people. There's a feel to it. So they're definitely listening to the guest, but it's there's a part, of course, that always gets guided by me. So there's sort of an identity there. And has that morphed for you, or did you discover it? Was there ever an arrival of, like, after 200 episodes or 50 episodes or something like that, you go, God, this is what my show's about?
That's a great question. I think the show has told me what it is and what it wants to be through the doing of it. I feel like it still adheres quite closely. It hews very tightly to what it's always been, which is interesting conversations with people that inspire me in different ways. And, over 700 episodes, I think themes emerge. Like, obviously I have an interest in endurance sports and, ultra distance trail runners and stuff like that. Like, those people tend to, recur as guests on the show. And that's, something that I'm personally interested in, but also is a very small subculture. Like, I understand when I have these people on, those are not going to be massive episodes, but I think that there's a lot of wisdom to be mined from a lot of those individuals. But I think the overarching, theme, if there was one to be articulated, would be transformation. Like, how do we, level up every single day? How can we change our lives from where we are today and grow into this other place? And exploring that opens up a pretty wide aperture to looking at sort of examples of people who have done that in various interesting ways, and then, the mind, body, spirit approach to accomplishing that, which allows me to talk to, all kinds of people from, practitioners of various, spiritual, philosophies, or academics, again, medical doctors, athletes, entrepreneurs. How do we do this in business, et cetera? So I've always cast a pretty wide net. And again, the rule is, is this person somebody who would be compelling and that I'm naturally interested in speaking to, and has some wisdom to impart to the audience that would be helpful and practical to, incorporate into their lives.
Perfect word, because one of the things that I notice about you, or my observation of you, is that you've had many transformations. I mean, that's literally in my notes of diving deeper into you. And I was like, you've just gone through so many transformations. I feel like you really have, through different phases of your life, everything from how you grew up and not, claiming to be an entrepreneur, to having addiction, to being an endurance athlete, to having a successful podcast, now books. And it's like, veganism. I mean, there's just so many different, I feel like, transformations. So while you ask everyone, your main curiosity is transformation, in my opinion, you are like top of the list for people that have had so many magnificent transformations and have so many stories. So it's definitely your turn to tell the story of how you were able to do that. And I guess I'm really curious about what allows you to be able to move from one phase to another phase. And was it effort, or is that something that actually comes natural? Not everything's easy, but that is seemingly, from an observational standpoint, very much part of your life.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that observation, Danica. I mean, I'm not sure exactly how to dive into this. I would say that the changes and the transformations that I've endured in my life are generally catalyzed by some kind of pain point, where the pain of my current situation exceeded the fear of doing something different. And that has typically been my motivator. And I've gone kicking and screaming into all of these transformations. None of it was graceful, linear, or overnight. It's, when you kind of look at it in the rear view mirror, me now being an older person, it all kind of looks like it unfolded very naturally and gracefully, but the lived experience of that was very different. Right. But as a result of having to change or being compelled to change because of pain, has taught me a few things about the nature of change itself. And that began with my struggle with alcoholism and ultimately getting sober, and learning tools for a different way of living, which I think opened me up to the possibility, that I could change, and if I could change, other people could change. And as a result of my participation in the recovery community, being witness to so many people changing their lives in miraculous ways, and then understanding that change isn't a static thing. Like, we have to continue to grow and iterate. Like, there is no stasis. There's no sitting on our laurels. And, yes, I have, weathered that experience and overcome it, but what are the other areas of my life that remain hidden, or that I don't want to look at, that, require redress and ultimately some level of transformation? And I've kind of, repeated that time and time again, like from addiction issues to transferring addiction issues onto workaholism, and my relationship with food, and my relationship with my physical self. Like, all of those have undergone, massive transformations over the years, but this process still continues. Like, now I'm a parent, and I have teens that have their own issues. And, there's many times where I feel at a complete loss as a parent as to how to, help these younger people, or parent them, or guide them in the best way possible. And that provides an opportunity for me to have people on the podcast tell me how to do this. You're the expert, et cetera. So, as they say in the parlance of recovery, the road gets narrower, and the kind of more you grow, the less tolerant you are of other aspects of how you behave, that ultimately you can't sleep at night until you look at them. And, so that's sort of been the approach to all of it. But it's not like I wake up in the morning and I'm like, what am I going to change today? I'm so excited. Like I hold on tightly to, my errant behavior patterns, of which there are still many.
Because it's easier. I mean, like human nature is to repeat patterns. I think that's like we're programmed to repeat the patterns that are instilled into us. And so I think maybe the way to get more focused and help people is explaining the process of a transformation. First of which is that you don't want it, right? Like, because the transformation is going to be hard. Like I would say, like, lessons are not meant to be easy. Their lessons are hard. And so maybe first, what are the signs? Like, as you've been through so many different phases of this, have you been able to become more aware and conscious of getting to a certain point where you're like, these things start happening when I know that I need to grow?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge subject matter. I mean, I guess I would begin by saying that, we all do things that we know are not moving our lives forward. Like we know when we're spending too much time scrolling on our phone that we probably would be happier and more productive if we were doing something else, and yet we keep doing it, right? That would be a very relatable example of that. Sure. So the first step in making change is simply awareness. Like, okay, this is a problem. And, kind of snapping out of the denial that like, it's fine, I can keep doing this, and really getting honest with yourself to say, I know that I would be a happier, more productive person if I could shed this particular thing that is holding me back. So, self-awareness, key, self-honesty, super important. And then I think the first step of really approaching that change is asking for help and not trying to do it yourself, like regardless of what the nature of the problem is. Like, because I think once you confide in another human being that you have a problem and that you would like help, suddenly no longer it's this private thing that's living inside of you. You have publicly announced it or semi-publicly announced it. And I think that's huge because now it's out there and there's sort of a release or a catharsis with just admitting it. Like that's why, when you go into an AA meeting, you raise your hand and you say, my name's Rich and I'm an alcoholic. Like you are making a public declaration of a problem that requires redress. So I think that's huge. And then, with the trusted people with whom you've confided this problem, I think the absolute key beyond anything else in making a change is willingness, the willingness to do something different and the willingness to not only ask for help, but to accept help. So when that trusted confidant says, well, why don't you do this, instead of retorting with all the reasons why that's a bad idea and you know how to solve it, just saying, okay, and then doing it and getting into action. Even if those actions are tiny, like maybe I'll reduce my phone consumption, 20% or whatever. They don't have to be massive, gigantic gestures. Like I'm going to throw my phone in the ocean and never use a cell phone again. Like those tend to be, losing propositions over the long haul. And what you're really trying to do is establish a new behavioral pattern that will withstand the test of time and be sustainable. So the sustainable change happens with tiny iterations that, little behavioral tweaks that you master and become kind of rote in your experience over time. And the big changes that you seek really are a function of tiny little things that you do repeatedly, consistently over extended periods of time. That's how you move the needle on anything, frankly.
Yeah, I think that's what James Clear says in Atomic Habits. It's like you think that it's like all of a sudden one thing happens and then, oh, there it is. But it's actually been all of the little things that you've done over and over and over again so many times. And then all of a sudden things do change, but it can look like it wasn't that, but it does take that commitment to it. So what's the shittiest part? Like, I think this is where, for me, transformation and growth, and like, I feel like it's important for people to just know that there is a really, really shitty part. Like whether it's emotionally or in your immediate reality with people where you live, your job, whatever, like there usually is, in my experience anyway, the bigger the transformation, usually it comes with a package that is like, wow, this is a lot right now. This is a very overwhelming amount of stuff. But I think that talking about the, what I would call it, like the alchemy or the burning down of something so something else can be born and grow new from it, is important for people to understand. Has that been your experience too?
Well, you can't be a phoenix unless you burn first, right? You got to burn in the flames in order to kind of emerge with a greater wisdom, right? But I think the thing is, Danica, I mean, frankly, I think it all sucks. It's terrible. Like, there's nothing like sexy or romantic about like trying to make a change. It's a very difficult, uncomfortable, inelegant thing. And to the extent that the internet paints it as, something that's easy or that can be accomplished, without discomfort, I think is a disservice to people. I think it is important to tell people like, yeah, it fucking sucks. It's really hard. Like, the reason it's hard is because whatever you're doing, whether it's gambling or you keep getting into the same bad relationship, or, you drink too much, or whatever, the change is that you're trying to make, it's important to understand that behavior exists for a reason. And the reason is it's serving a purpose. Like, it's either taking you out of the discomfort of the moment, or it's a reflection of, a childhood trauma, or it's a behavioral pattern that got cemented very early in life that makes you feel secure and in control. Whatever the nature of it, the truth remains that you're doing it for a reason, and that reason is because it is serving you. It may be creating chaos in your life as well, but it is comforting you in a certain way. And when you ask that person, look, you got to stop doing that, or the person decides like, I can't do this anymore, you're asking them to break up with a good friend, right? They have to like part ways with this thing that has been a comfort blanket for them for a very long time. And so the early days of navigating, letting go of that is almost a mourning, and it's super painful and it's really uncomfortable. And there will be many moments where, you're going to want to go back to it, or the discomfort of having to really confront the challenging emotions that start coming up when you don't have that comfort blanket can be completely overwhelming. And it's why mastering a change or overcoming an addiction can be so difficult. And, I don't use the word addiction cavalierly. Like, I think addiction really lives on a spectrum. So on the far end of that spectrum, you have, the hardcore alcoholic or the heroin addict, et cetera. But, I think that we all live somewhere along this spectrum, because we're all engaging in behaviors that we know are not a reflection of our higher self, and yet we can't seem to stop doing them. And, and they're not making our lives better, they're making our lives worse. And that's the classic definition of addiction. So, looking inward and being honest with yourself about what those behaviors are and summoning the courage to redress them is a difficult thing. And then making that change, it's really difficult. And you're going to be uncomfortable for quite a while before your neurochemistry resets, or you find some other healthier activity or pursuit that can, provide you with, whatever the errant behavior, was doing for you. And that's why most people in, a classic addiction sense either relapse, or people just can't, master a healthier behavior pattern and kind of retreat back to what they know, what's familiar, and what's comfortable.
As you were talking, I was going to ask you if repatterning or going through a transformation, learning something new, doing something new, dropping a habit felt to you as though it's an addiction, and you totally answered it. I try and think about that when things are really hard. It's like, I'm from a neurochemistry standpoint, my brain gets this dopamine sort of hit every time I repeat a pattern, and it doesn't have to be a good one. And I try and convince myself that like it's hard because I'm addicted to it.
So then the question becomes like, are you willing to do something about that?
Right.
And if the answer is no, like I kind of like it and I'm going to stick with it, like no judgment, like, okay, maybe you need to keep doing it until things get crazier. And then you're ready to look at it.
Because you still go to AA a lot, as far as I understand. And what has that kind of taught you? Because this, as we're talking about it, can holistically be overlaid to everything. Like addiction is, like you said, a scale. So what are the tools that help you with this spectrum?
Yeah, it's a little tricky because there's a tradition in Alcoholics Anonymous that, we're not supposed to share at the level of press, radio, and film. So I can only speak generally about kind of the recovery modality, but it has been absolutely transformative in my life. The 12 steps saved my life. They continue to save my life. And, to this day, my number one priority is to stay sober and help another alcoholic achieve sobriety. And the minute I start to lose sight of that, or I deprioritize that in my life, is the minute that things in my life start to go a little bit sideways. And I've learned that the hard way as somebody who's been sober for a very long time. But, kind of the principles of this program, I think, are applicable to anyone and everyone, because they're really tools for living. They're about, being honest with yourself about your behavior, taking inventory of that behavior and identifying where your character defects or your behavior contributed to how a situation went sideways. It's about taking accountability and responsibility for that. And then, amending those situations, not just apologizing, but literally trying to correct situations that have gone sideways as a result of your behavior. And so now it's very rare that I have the impulse or the craving to drink or use a drug. It's really about emotional sobriety, because without drugs and alcohol, I need something else to self-regulate and modulate my emotions. And if I'm not practicing these principles and taking advantage of these tools, then it's like squeezing a water balloon. Like something's always like popping up, like, because my inner addict is always searching for that thing that can take me out of the moment and, soothe me or give me that dopamine release. And it requires like constant vigilance. And sometimes I'm good at it and often I'm bad at it. And then, beyond that, a really core fundamental principle of this program is to really be of service to other people. Like that piece of like helping another alcoholic to achieve sobriety, really it's about service. So it's taking what you've learned and, trying to help other people who are in the situation that you were in once before. And I try to practice these principles, and this is a big thing, like practice these in everything that you do, and certainly in the construct of the podcast, which, yes, it's a for-profit enterprise, and this is how I make a living, but fundamentally it's still an act of service. So I always try to approach the conversations and what transpires there from a perspective of giving to the audience something nourishing that can be helpful to them.
Is that the purpose of the podcast, would you say? I understand, yes, that it's you monetize it, but what would you do if you didn't make money? Like, of any of the facets of it, what part of it would stay if you didn't get paid?
Well, I mean, I've been doing it for 10 years now, and I think we didn't make any money for the first 4 or 5 years. So I did it for many years without making any money, and actually never thought that it would make money. Like podcasting was very different back in 2012 and 2013. So it's almost like a accidental happenstance that now it's become this thing that generates a fair amount of revenue. Would I still do it if it didn't make any money? Yeah, I probably would. It probably wouldn't. But I would have to be doing a lot of other things in my life at the same time. Whereas now this can really, kind of monopolize most of my focus.
The books that you have, this Voicing Change, you have vegan. Are you still a vegan?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you have like, there was a cheese book. I remember you gave me a cheese book when I came to your house and did the interview. And you have an ultra marathon or ultra athlete book. But these voicing change books, they feel like coffee table books. Is that the intended nature of them, to be inspirational, kind of like coffee table books?
Yeah. So in 2012, I wrote a memoir, Finding Ultra, that came out and has
Mm-hmm.
done great, still sells. And then my wife and I did a couple cookbooks, and then she wrote this book called This Cheese is Nuts, which is how to make
Yeah.
plant-based cheese. And now
Mm,
she
yeah.
has a plant-based cheese company called Shrimu, which if you don't have it, I would love to send you some.
Oh, cool. I
And then
love
the
it.
Voicing Change books. Yeah, I'll get your address and I'll make sure you get some. It's
Thank you.
amazing. It's going to blow your mind. But anyway, so the Voicing Change books we've done 2 volumes. We're working on a 3rd right now.
Yeah.
And they are really, as you mentioned, like a coffee table version of the podcast. It's beautiful photography. Each book has about 50 past guests who are featured. And we kind of excerpt the best of that conversation and transcribe it with an introduction that I make. And we have some essays from some of the past guests. So for people who might have read Tim Ferriss's book, Tools of Titans, it's sort of a coffee table version of that that is intended not for a giant audience. Like we self-published these, which was its own kind of entrepreneurial experience of learning how to create a book in-house. They're really for the fans of the podcast and also for potential sponsors or people that I want to do business with. We can send it to them. And it's an example of, how we're trying to craft content at the highest level of production value. Like everything that we're doing is, from my mind, like the intention is always to deliver at the highest level that we possibly can and sort of set the standard for the whole podcasting business about like how to do this well.
Yeah, they're really, really cool. I love that because podcasts are obviously so much to digest. They're, as we talked about, they can be hours long. And so to be able to create a moment, create an idea from that is cool, is so cool and so powerful. I get asked this all the time. Who have your favorite guests been? Who creates the most like concise, clear points that are really impactful? What are some of your best communicators? Because there's a lot of great guests. And when people ask me, I'm like, I'm literally just got asked today by my sister's husband. And I'm like, there's barely any that I don't like. So it's hard for me to say, well, this is the best. It's really about who surprises me or who is really able to be very concise and clear with their words and help it land, because not everyone is incredible at getting a concept across into a tangible way. So who do you love and who makes the book in that way?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, it's always a difficult question to answer. Like I don't want to have to choose amongst my babies, and everybody that I invite onto the podcast is somebody who I'm already in love with and am excited to communicate with. There are, of course, a couple favorites, and the favorites, again, it depends on what kind of category you're interested in. Like on the subject of communication skills, I think, Andrew Huberman is somebody who stands out and excels. Stanford medical school professor, neuroscientist who started his podcast, Huberman Lab, which is now like one of the most popular podcasts. And I think the reason why he's become so successful, and that was like the YouTube version of the podcast that we did, which came out like before he even started his podcast, I think has 12 million views now, which blows my mind because it's basically a 2-hour neuroscience lecture that 12 million people would tune into that. It's like, why did 12 million people decide to watch this video? And trying to answer that question, I think it's because he's taking challenging scientific ideas that have high applicability in our lives and communicating incredibly complex ideas in a way, as I said at the outset, that challenges the audience, but not too much, and never panders to them. Like he's like, I know that you can understand me if you're paying close attention. And he has such precision with his language. Like he not only is a master of his specialty, he has this incredible talent and facility for language precise language in conveying these ideas that I think distinguishes him from a lot of other people. Like most scientists are not communicators. They're in labs doing work. It's not their skill set. So it's pretty rare that I think you can find somebody who is adept in that way, and he certainly is. Beyond that, my favorite guests are generally ones that have undergone some kind of massive transformation. And, kind of at the top of that heap, I would put John McAvoy. I just did my second podcast with him recently, which came out. But the first one that I did with him, which was about 4 or 5 years ago, he just blew my mind with the most insane story of transformation I had ever heard. This is a guy who grew up in a South London crime family and was reared from a very, very early age to be an armed robber, almost in a kind of Goodfellas sense. The uncles and the cousins and all of that who were very successful as career criminals, kind of grooming him at a very young age to do the same, which he fulfilled that role and became one of Great Britain's most notorious criminals on the lam, etc. And ultimately, it's a long story, but ultimately got busted, was serving a double life sentence, and while in prison, discovered a facility for endurance by dint of experimenting with an indoor rowing machine in the gym, which, to make a long story short, he ends up setting, in a very short period of time, British and world indoor records on that indoor rowing machine, and becomes this incredible athlete while incarcerated. Ultimately gets a chance at parole, tells the parole officer that if he is released, that he's going to pursue a career as a professional athlete. They laughed at him. Ultimately, they parole him. He goes out into the world, tries to become a professional rower, realizes that because he didn't have the experience as a young person in the boat, like he couldn't quite get the feel, even though he had this incredible engine, and then pursues Ironman triathlon and becomes Nike's only sponsored professional Ironman triathlete, and then goes on to this career of prison reform advocacy, testifying at 10 Downing Street, and has just become this extraordinary citizen intent on changing the way that we incarcerate people, building fitness programs into the prison system. And the way he tells his story is so compelling and so cinematic that it's mind-blowing. And it shows people, it demonstrates that no matter how far down you have gone, that there is always hope. And the way in which he refused to relinquish agency over his life or to lose hope in a possible future for himself is incredibly palpable. So, I've got a couple other guests who have similar stories like that, but I think those are among, my favorite because they're so hopeful. And I think people learn through story, and a story well told is going to rent space in your consciousness in the way that, just a conveyance of information isn't. And so I have massive respect for, not only people who have endured such tremendous obstacles, but have the ability to tell that story in a way that, can empower so many people.
What do you think we're here for? Like you talk about that story, and you talk about how someone's able to still find a way with all of that, how you tell your story and have found a way. We've all been finding our way. What is this reality all about? Like, what do you think we're here for?
You're coming in hot with the easy questions, right?
The podcast is called Pretty Intense.
Right.
It's after my book. It was the book. And then I realized that it's a pretty good description of me. I guess, it's, I love the big questions. It's also, sometimes when you get really specific, there's sort of only this one little area to go. But when you get a little bit more broad, whatever comes to mind, I want to hear because you're uniquely different than me.
Yeah, well, this qualifies as a pretty intense question. I guess I would say, what are we here for? What are we here to do? I mean, I think we're here to have experiences, grow from those experiences, and then figure out how to contribute to a better world by virtue of what we've learned as a result of those experiences and the growth that we've encountered as a result of them.
Yeah. I mean, growing is fundamental to me as well. What do you think? Do you think that it's easier or harder in the world right now? Like there just seems to be I mean, the world in the last couple of years has just been so interesting and different. And at times it feels like timelines are so fast, and I don't know how spiritual you get or anything, but it just it seems like a different reality we continue to evolve into. And so do you think it's easier or harder than ever? Do you think there is more good than ever or more bad than ever?
I think it's a little bit of both. I would say that things are pretty intense right now for everybody, right? It is very intense out there. Everything feels intense. Everything feels heavy. And it's an interesting time because we have free access to so many tools to help us become better, happier, more fulfilled, etc. But we also have a culture that I think in certain ways coddles us and tells us that the recipe for happiness is comfort and luxury and material accumulation. And so it's never been easier to be kind of sedentary, right? And with the sedentary nature of our lives and the easy access through Postmates and delivery, services to have our food, sent directly to us. Like we don't have to do very much, right?
It's kind of the lap of luxury as much as you want it.
Yeah, and we've deluded ourselves into thinking this will make us happy, but I think this is moving us further and further apart from happiness, because happiness is a function of feeling alive. And in order to feel alive, we have to inure ourselves to putting ourselves in challenging circumstances, to get out of our comfort zone and try new things. And, our culture doesn't necessarily drive us in that direction, which means we have to take responsibility for that ourselves. It's insane to me that, we live in a nation that is so unbelievably prosperous, and yet we've never been more unhealthy as a society. Obesity rates, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, these conditions, which are chronic lifestyle ailments, a result of the choices that we make about how we live and what we eat and how we move our bodies, are unnecessarily debilitating and killing millions and millions of people every year. Meanwhile, our rates of depression, anxiety, all of these mental disorders are higher than they ever have been. We're medicating people, we're feeding ourselves terrible processed foods, and we're sitting on our couch and we have an endless stream of choices to make about entertainment to distract us from our reality or whatever it is that we're uncomfortable with in our lives. And so we're in this mild medicated state at all times. Whenever we're bored, we can just pick this thing up and scroll through it. And so I think we're detached and distanced in a way that we never have been historically from what makes us human, which is community and analog experiences and moving our bodies and living more in sync with the natural rhythms of the planet. All of these, kind of historical primal ways of being that are built into our DNA and are instinctual are anathema to the modern way of life. And, so it creates this dissonance, I think, because like I said at the outset, we do have access to all the answers. Information is not the problem. Behavior change is the problem. And trying to figure out how to merge the information with the behavior change, I think is really key. But it's confusing for a lot of people right now. People get mixed messages about how to live. And again, it requires, because a lot of these modalities of modern living are highly addictive, like,
Right.
whether it's Netflix or your phone or processed food or the comfortable chair at your house, whatever it is, like, it's hard to break those habits because they've been specifically designed to addict you, frankly. So it's almost like not our fault. It's that the whole infrastructure of our society is driving us towards these behaviors that are making us unhealthy and unhappy.
Design a society, design a culture, design a community, design a reality that would be the antidote to all of the problems that you just so well laid out.
Yeah, so you're going to ask me to solve the world's problems, Danica.
Yep.
That is a
Yep.
very intense.
Well,
That's
you've talked
more
to
than a pretty
700
intense question.
people. You're really
Yeah.
smart. You're very articulate. You're very wise. You've been through a lot yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say, first and foremost, like, I'm not going to tell you that I have the answers to all these problems, nor am I going to tell you that I've mastered the routine that takes me out of the allure and the pull of the world that we live in.
You're human.
I do a few things. I mean, I'm human, and I'm on my phone too much, and I get short with my kids from time to time, and I like a good Netflix crime show just like everybody else. So
I watch Dahmer. I get it.
Okay, right. But I do, have certain things that I make sure that I do, if not daily, as close to daily as possible. And that is a morning meditation practice, a journaling practice, getting out in nature every single day. And I do that through my endurance training, whether it's, swimming, cycling, running, or hiking or something like that. Like, I try to get outdoors every single day. I sleep outdoors in a tent. I don't know if you knew that about me. But I actually sleep outdoors and have for like the last 3 or 4 years at this point. That's a whole other story that I can tell you about, but to kind of stay on point, I try to have rules around the phone. I try to make sure that I carve out time for friendships, no matter how busy I am. And that's something that I haven't been historically great at, and I'm trying to do more. And that kind of leads into, the broader, like, what would the ideal society look like for me? I think the answer to that is first appreciating that we're not going to move backwards technologically. Like, the technological innovation curve is going to continue. So accepting that as a truth and a immutable reality, how can we live more meaningful lives within that construct? I think, if we could return to, not to be too hippy-dippy about it, but if we could live a more communal existence, I think that would solve a lot of our problems. Like, it really does take a village to raise children, to feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself, to have mutual shared responsibilities for things that a collective relies upon. Like, all of those things, I think, are what make us human. And living on a cul-de-sac in a suburban neighborhood doesn't serve us in that regard. And as a parent and as somebody who has parents who are now elderly, and my father-in-law who passed away, like, we've all had experiences with how we treat our elders, which I think is abominable. Like, it used to be they were part of the community and they were respected, and these were the wise ones that we counted upon to share their experiences. Like, that is not part of our culture whatsoever. We just warehouse them once they reach an age in which they're no longer productive. Coming of age customs for young people where they have to, as a collective, endure certain rites of passage as they become older, is also a tradition that historically has been part of what it means to be human. That's no longer the case.
Like a vision quest or something?
A vision, yeah, something, like, now we have, the only thing we have now is like Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, and bar mitzvahs. But, the roots of that, the antecedent of those rites of passage, have been, traditionally much more robust and challenging. And, I think we would be better off if every young person had to enter some form of public service after high school, whether that's military or Peace Corps or, some kind of collective experience that is about service, because I think, we're in a culture where we value individualism and material gain and status, and we're missing the bigger picture, which is how are we all contributing to a greater whole. And I think that used to be part of the American experience, and now, as we've arrived at this splintered, fractured reality that we live in, I don't feel like we have any kind of shared principles that allow us to cohere as a nation. And I think a return to what could really bond us as a broader culture would be something that young people have to all do, like some kind of mandatory service, I think would be extremely beneficial.
That, and definitely elders and community. I mean, that used to be the norm. You were raised with aunts and uncles and grandparents, and
listen, it's hard to raise kids, and even if you have two parents in the house, like somebody's got to go do something. It used to be there was tons of people around, everybody's pitching in to help everybody else, and we're so far divorced from that reality now. And how about just sitting around the campfire at night, telling stories and sharing wisdom? I mean, this is where podcasting in a digital respect has kind of filled that void, I feel like people traditionally didn't think that anybody would be able to listen to a long form conversation because we're so accustomed to the soundbite and, the nature of what broadcast television is like. And yet podcasting has succeeded, not only succeeded, it's become this like really powerful medium, because I think there is something deep within us that misses that campfire experience and the kind of, vulnerable, authentic, natural feel of human connection. And I think podcasting on some level is serving that need that has been so long underserved.
Do you think that maybe there is a problem with what is generally characterized as success? When you ask somebody, that's truly been successful at something or older and has had a lot of experience, and you say, what is success? They're not going to answer with, I made a lot of money, right? But still, as you're growing up, success and something that drives you each and every day to some degree is money, and is success in that way, so that you can buy what you want and do what you want. And it's some sort of measure of success. The money is like a measurement almost. So do you think that is maybe one of the problems, and that maybe success needs to be elevated in the area of raising really good children, or having a really balanced and harmonious family, and or just being joyful and fulfilled? I mean, there's so many successful people that aren't joyful and fulfilled because of chasing this sort of illusion of success that comes in the form of money. And so I think about when you're talking about sitting around a campfire, and I'm like, what would facilitate that? Like, what would facilitate the environment where you're with a community of your family and your close friends? And I think what takes it apart, and why that doesn't happen, is because people go and they move here for a job, they move here for a job, and everybody gets dispersed because work tends to take us to these different places. So what is it that's going to give us that drive to live in a certain place and we are driven to succeed, driven to be successful? And it seems like maybe there needs to be a new definition for really, really what success is.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you that we need to redefine success, but the way that we define success cannot be extricated from what it means to be American, because America was founded on this notion of rugged individualism, back to this subject, where we value the individual over the collective. And with that, the priority becomes, how are you going to get yours? It's all about like me, and what am I accumulating? And how does that measure up status-wise against the Joneses, my neighbor, my colleagues, et cetera? And we've deluded ourselves into believing that happiness is a factor of how high you can climb that particular ladder on the precipice to summiting the apex of individual success, right? And this is completely backwards. And there are plenty of modern Western cultures that, have a completely different view on this and thus value a very different definition of success. Like if you live in someplace like Copenhagen, it's completely different. So there is something uniquely American about this. Okay. And I think now we're kind of being hoisted on our petard for this sensibility. And it's providing, in my opinion, an opportunity to deconstruct this and really look at it in a culture in which so many people are unhappy, despite, so many things being more accessible than they ever have been. Like in the history of mankind, like things are pretty good. We tend to look at how everything is wrong and terrible and all of that, but we're safer, healthcare is better, prosperity is much higher. All of these sort of factors statistically indicate that like the world that we live in now is the best time to be alive, right? So if it's the best time to be alive, like why are we more unhappy than we used to be? And I think it's because of this focus on the self at the cost of the collective. And if we can switch or redefine our notion of success to contemplate, at least on some level, how we're contributing as opposed to what it is that we're extracting, I think the kernel of true happiness, resides in there. And I know for myself, I'm a selfish person. I'm ambitious. I have things that I want to accomplish. I'm competitive. I can be petty, all that stuff. But when I can set that aside and show up for somebody else, even a very small way, I walk away from those experiences feeling much happier and better about myself. That experience will fade, and I'll revert back to being my whoever I am. So it's a practice, right? But I think the more that we can inhabit the experience of approaching every interaction, whether it's business or personal or whatever, with the mindset of like, how am I contributing to this? How can I leave this situation with these people being better off than they were before, as opposed to like, where's mine and what am I going to get out of this? To me, fundamentally, like that's the beginning of the shift. And, in my experience, and I've had high highs and low lows and successes and failures, et cetera. But to me, success is knowing that you contributed more than you extracted. And success is also a function of like how much domain you have over how you spend your time, right? So the more control that I have over the decisions I make about how I spend my time, that's a huge success for me. That's time that I can contribute to friends and to my family and to my relationships. And when I do that from a contributory state of mind, like I feel happier and better. And as somebody who's spoken to centenarians and old people, and I'm sure you have as well, like they will all tell you exactly what you said at the outset, which is, when they're at the end of their life reflecting backwards, they never say like, I wish I worked more. They say, I wish I spent more time with my kids, or I wish I had, been a better friend, et cetera. It's all about like relationships and the extent to which they contributed to those relationships.
Would you say then that that's your purpose, to contribute, to be of service? How would you characterize, because they feel a little different, like defining success and then purpose? Do you think are they the same, or are they different for you?
I don't know. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about success, but I do think about purpose. Yeah. I don't know that we all have one purpose, but I would say a purpose that I try to fulfill is to be a conduit of wisdom and to be a servant to positive change individually and collectively.
Yeah, you are. But you're not getting out of this interview without answering one last question. Why do you sleep in a tent?
Oh, no. Oh, you want to know?
I mean, you said you would explain why you sleep in a tent. So you just have to end with helping, because we might all start sleeping in tents when you tell us why. Sure.
Well, it's sort of a sleep hygiene thing that began many years ago. My wife and I would would always like have this sort of battle because she liked the bedroom warm and I like it cold. And neither of us were ever happy. Like she's under all the covers and I'm on top of the covers sweating. So it was always too hot or too cold. Neither of us were happy. And you've been to my home. We have this flat roof.
Beautiful.
And there's like a wall that goes up from one side.
Yeah.
And one summer we would do these kind of movie nights on the roof where all the kids and my wife and I would get sleeping bags and bean bags and we'd lay on the roof and we would project movies onto that wall. And one of those evenings, I just fell asleep on the roof under the stars and woke up the next day having had the best night of sleep that I could remember. And I couldn't believe how deeply I slept. Like something about the cool desert air, I live in Southern California, just agreed with me. And I told Julie that day, I was like, I'm going to sleep out on the roof again. Like that was an amazing experience. And she was like, knock yourself out. So I just started sleeping in a sleeping bag on the roof of our house, but I would wake up covered in condensation because the dew and everything like that in the morning. And I was like, well, this is great. Like I'm having the best sleep of my life and Julie can set the temperature in the bedroom however she wants, but I love it cold. To me, it almost, like if it's down in the 40s, that's like perfect.
Oh, yeah.
So I ended up getting a tent and then I had a tent on a roof for a while and I've had many different incarnations of the tent over the years. And then this past year for my birthday, my wife got me like a proper glamping tent, like on a wooden deck. So I have like a beautiful kind of room now with a bed in it. So it's not like I'm sleeping on the ground or anything like that, but I do sleep outdoors. And there's something about the cool evening air that just, I don't know, it soothes my soul. And I just have the experience of sleeping more deeply on a consistent basis. And sleep is elusive for me. Like I've struggled with my sleep quality and this has gone a long way towards, providing me with the level of restfulness that allows me to kind of, do all the things in the world that I want to do. And I started it way back then and I still love it.
Wow. Well, there'll be a new wave of people out there listening that struggle with their sleep that are going to think, I'm going to sleep outside tonight and see how that goes. So thank you.
And listen, I don't live in Vermont. I live in Southern California. So I realize like this is.
Wait, are the doors open? Do you have the tent? Like, are the tent doors open?
I keep them. Yeah, I keep them open. I keep them open at night
a bug
when
net?
I'm sleeping. Well, I can zip it shut, but bugs aren't a big problem where I am. So I like it. I like to keep it as open as possible.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds like a solution to me.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for your contribution and your service and 5 years of doing a podcast and not knowing if you'd ever make money, and look at you now. And it really just goes to show how when you just surrender to what calls you and what feels right, amazing things happen. So I'm excited to see what the next transformation will be, and I'll ask to talk to you.
Hopefully I don't have to crash and burn in some kind of crazy way to transform again. We'll see what that looks like. But anyway, I really appreciate the time today. Those were like very challenging questions. Like I hope I followed through appropriately, but like you had me really thinking there, Danica.
You were amazing. Thanks everybody for listening to the Pretty Intense podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you heard today and you want to hear more, please click on the subscribe button.